Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. Today I've got a brand new story for you. The wind whispered through the canyons of Arizona like it carried secrets too old for words. The year was 1872, and dusk fell hard over the campfires of a traveling settler family, carving their way westward through Apache territory. Among them was Clara Whitlock, 17 and restless, her eyes reflecting the firelight and something far older than her years. Her father, a war veteran turned farmer, had warned her since childhood to keep her distance from the people of the land. "They don't live like us. They don't think like us," he had always said. But Clara had never liked walls, even invisible ones. That night, the camp was quiet, save for the crackling of flame and murmurs of prayer. Clara sat at the edge of the wagon circle, pretending to mend her shawl, but really watching the shadows beyond the trees. Something felt different. There was a tension in the air, not of danger, but anticipation, like a held breath. And then she saw him, a lone rider on a chestnut horse, half hidden behind brush, watching without moving. He was Apache. That much was clear from the silhouette of his stance and the feathers that adorned his braided hair. Yet he made no threat, no sound. He just watched, and for a moment Clara watched back. When she blinked, he was gone. That night she couldn't sleep. Her father snored nearby. Her mother whispered scripture, but Clara stared at the canvas above her head, listening to the night. And then just past midnight, the horses snorted uneasily. She slipped from the wagon, barefoot and bold, drawn toward the woods. She didn't know what she expected. Danger, maybe. Curiosity had always been her sin. But instead of fear, she found a quiet figure by the stream, kneeling to drink, moonlight casting silver over his skin. He looked up. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. And still, in that moment, something ancient passed between them, older than language, deeper than reason. A connection neither had asked for, a bond that could not be ignored. She should have run, but she didn't. By morning, the stranger was nothing more than a question Clara couldn't shake. She moved through the camp in a daze, fetching water, stoking the fire, answering her mother's voice with automatic yeses and nos, but her thoughts remained in the woods. She kept glancing toward the trees, half expecting to see him again, but there was only wind and shadow. Her father noticed. He was a man who saw too much, even through narrowed eyes and days of silence. "Stay close today," he muttered as he saddled the horses. "There's talk of tribes moving again. We don't want trouble." Clara nodded, but her heart thudded at the word tribes. Did he mean the Apache? Was he still out there watching? The day stretched on in slow motion as the wagons creaked westward, wheels kicking up clouds of dust that clung to their clothes and hair. The desert was both endless and watchful. Hawks circled high above, riding the heat like spirits with wings. And it was one of those birds that caught Clara's eye near noon. It screamed, a long, shrill cry that echoed over the rocks and dove low, passing directly over her head before vanishing behind a ridge. Her father froze mid-step. "That's no ordinary hawk," he said quietly. "That's a warning." He didn't explain further. But Clara saw the way his hand hovered near his rifle. After that, as they set up camp for the night, the wind picked up, carrying the sharp scent of mesquite and something more. Smoke. Clara's mother said it was probably a storm far off, but Clara felt the same chill she'd felt when she saw the Apache rider. When night fell, Clara stayed awake again, sitting near the embers, her eyes drawn again and again to the tree line. She didn't understand why she felt so pulled. She should have been afraid. She should have obeyed. But when the fire died and the camp lay silent, she walked again into the dark, and this time he was waiting. Not hiding, not lurking, just standing in the open as though he had always belonged there. His voice was low when he spoke, his English careful. "You should not be here." Clara's breath caught. "Neither should you," she replied. But neither moved. The space between them was filled with danger and something else neither of them had a name for. The moon rose swollen and red above the canyon ridge, casting an eerie glow over the desert floor. It was the kind of night that felt ancient, when time thinned and the land remembered things people tried to forget. Clara stood in the half-light, her bare feet sinking into warm sand as she stared at the Apache man who had stepped from the shadows of her thoughts into living breath. He said nothing at first, his posture calm, his eyes unreadable. She didn't even know his name. Her heart pounded like a drumbeat, but she didn't step back. "Why are you watching us?" she asked, her voice hushed but steady. He didn't flinch. Because your people do not know the land, and the land does not like to be disrespected. Clara frowned, unsure if it was a warning or a philosophy. We're just passing through. His gaze lingered on her face, on the strands of blonde hair falling from her braid. No one ever just passes through, he said quietly. She shivered, though the air was warm. You should not walk alone at night, he added. And there was no threat in his voice, only fact. There are things out here more dangerous than me. Clara looked away, suddenly unsure of everything. Why had she come? Curiosity, defiance, loneliness? The firelight from her camp flickered dimly in the distance. She could still return, pretend none of this had happened, but she didn't move. What's your name? She asked. A pause then. Tahu. The name settled on her tongue like a stone in a quiet stream. Clara, she offered in return. They stood in silence, the space between them thick with something unspoken. And then, from far off, a distant sound. Hoofbeats. Clara turned sharply. Tahu moved instantly, grabbing her hand, pulling her into the shadows beneath a boulder. She didn't resist. A group of riders passed, torches in hand, their voices loud and rough. Not Apaches, white men, scouts maybe or worse. Clara held her breath. One of them looked toward the rocks, but didn't stop. The group kept riding. When it was over, Tahu let go of her hand slowly. Not everyone is safe, he said. Not even among your own. Clara looked up at him, her heart racing for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. She didn't know what she was stepping into, but she had already crossed the line. They met again the next night, and the one after that, always beneath the cloak of darkness, where the stars bore silent witness to something that neither of them dared name. Tahu never spoke much, but when he did, Clara listened with a hunger that surprised her. He told her of the land, the names of the mountains, the sacred rivers, the trees that whispered old truths. He told her of spirits that lived in the rocks, and how silence was sometimes a language more honest than words. Clara in turn spoke of her mother's hymns, her father's stories of war, and how the West was supposed to be a place for new beginnings, though all she saw was dust and uncertainty. Tahu listened, his eyes never leaving hers. One night, as they sat near the stream, he spoke a truth that struck her like an arrow. I was born to two worlds, he said. My father was white, my mother Apache. Neither side claims me fully. Clara stared at him, startled. Then where do you belong? He shrugged, looking away. Nowhere or everywhere. Depends on the day. She wanted to reach out to close the small distance between them, but her hand stayed on her lap. You understand more than you think, he added. And there was something in his voice, soft but sure, that made her chest tighten. The next day, the wagon train stopped early. Her father had seen smoke rising from the east, and rumors of Apache raiders had made the men tense and sharp-tongued. We'll ride out before sunrise, he said, loading his rifle. We're too exposed here. Clara's stomach twisted. They were leaving, and she didn't know how to say goodbye to someone she wasn't even supposed to know. That night, she slipped away again. Tahu was waiting as if he'd known. We're leaving at dawn, she said, her voice thick. I won't see you again. He was quiet, then nodded slowly. Some crossings are meant only once, he said. Clara blinked back the sting in her eyes. This didn't feel like once. He stepped closer, close enough that she could hear his breath. It never does until it is. Then, gently, he placed something in her hand. A woven string, warm from his skin, lined with carved bone for memory. She clutched it tightly, and when she turned to go, she felt the ache of parting settle deep, as if leaving a piece of herself behind. The wagon train moved at dawn, wheels groaning over the dry earth, hooves pounding like war drums across the open land. Clara rode beside her mother, her fingers clutching the reins tighter than needed, the woven string from Tahu hidden beneath her sleeve. The dust stung her eyes, but it was not the wind that brought tears. She didn't look back. By noon, they crossed a narrow ravine and into flat plains, golden and silent. That's when the first shot rang out. The sound split the air like a crack of thunder, and before anyone could scream, chaos erupted. Men shouted, women ducked, and horses reared in panic. Clara saw riders crest the ridge. 5, maybe 6 faces covered, rifles drawn. These weren't Apache. Their clothes were ragged, their movements desperate. Bandits, predators. She was yanked from her horse by rough hands, dragged toward a wagon for cover. The scene became a blur of gunfire and screams. Her father returned fire, his face set like stone, but he fell moments later, clutching his side, blood blooming beneath his coat. "Clara!" screamed, crawling to him, but her mother pulled her back, eyes wide with terror. "Stay down," the woman gasped. Clara watched helplessly as bullets tore through canvas and flesh alike. The air turned thick with dust and the coppery stench of blood. And then, out of nowhere, a cry echoed through the canyon, sharp and fierce. Riders poured in from the opposite ridge, painted and swift, arrows flying with terrifying precision. The bandits broke ranks, confusion twisting their faces. It was the Apache. Clara's heart clenched as she saw him. Tahu, riding at the front, face painted, bow drawn. He moved like a ghost through smoke, striking down 2 men before his horse even slowed. In minutes it was over. The attackers scattered, leaving bodies behind. Tahu dismounted near the wounded wagon, his eyes sweeping the scene until they found her. For a moment the noise faded, and only the sound of her heartbeat remained. He stepped toward her, ignoring the settlers' fearful stares, his presence both terrifying and magnetic. Clara stood frozen as he reached her side, kneeling beside her injured father. "He needs help," Tahu said simply. "And I know where to take him." Her mother hesitated, eyes wide with fear and disbelief, but Clara nodded once fiercely. "We'll go." There was no other choice. They moved quickly. The group, small and silent, Clara, her mother, and 2 wounded men, rode with Tahu and 3 Apache warriors across the valley, following narrow trails the settlers never knew existed. The journey was tense. Her mother avoided Tahu's eyes, clutching her rosary like it could ward off ghosts. But Clara rode near him, each mile softening the distance between the girl and the man who had once been only a shadow. Her father drifted in and out of consciousness, his breath shallow. The bullet still lodged in his side. Tahu's people had sent word ahead, and when they reached a hidden canyon village built among the cliffs, they were greeted not with spears but quiet concern. Women emerged, their faces stoic but kind, guiding Clara's father to a tent lined with hides and herbs. The medicine man, an elder with silver braids, began his work without ceremony. Clara sat outside with Tahu, watching the sun sink behind the rocks. "Why did you come?" she asked, voice low. Tahu didn't look at her. "Because I knew they would attack. I tried to warn you. That hawk, they are our watchers." Clara turned the bracelet on her wrist, guilt tightening her throat. "We never meant to bring war to your land." He finally looked at her, something sharp in his gaze. "But you did, even without meaning to." Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken blame. And yet she didn't move. That night they were offered food and shelter. Her mother remained cold, but Clara listened as the women sang near the fire, voices rising like wind through pines. She watched the way the children clung to Tahu when he passed, how the elders nodded to him with respect. He belonged here. She was the outsider now, and yet she felt safer than she had in weeks. Tahu sat beside her, his presence calming. "Your father will live," he said softly. "But the land will not forget this blood." Clara swallowed hard. "What happens now?" He paused. "That depends on you." She didn't ask what he meant. Deep down she already knew. This was more than rescue, more than gratitude. Something unspoken had taken root, and whether it bloomed or withered, it would change everything. The days that followed blurred in golden light and quiet tension. Clara's father recovered slowly beneath the hands of the Apache healers, though his pride remained wounded. He refused to speak to Tahu, offering only curt nods when necessary. Her mother stayed near the tent, avoiding eye contact with anyone, clutching prayer beads like a lifeline. But Clara wandered. She learned the names of trees and stones, listened to the stories whispered by women around the fire, watched the way the people moved like the land itself, measured, quiet, certain, and always she found herself near Tahu. He didn't ask questions. He didn't make promises, but when she sat beside him at dusk, it felt like answers were forming without words. One evening, as crimson clouds swirled above the canyon, her father stood weakly at the entrance of their shelter. "We leave tomorrow," he said, his voice soft but firm. "We've stayed long enough." Clara's heart sank. That night she met Tahu by the stream. He stood with his hands in the water, watching moonlight ripple over his skin. "You're leaving," he said without turning. "Yes," she replied. The silence between them stretched tight as a bowstring. "Then say what you came to say." She stepped forward. the bracelet he gave her burning against her wrist. This wasn't just kindness. You know it. I know it. His jaw clenched. And if you stayed, it would never be simple, she whispered. Not here, not there. He turned to face her, eyes dark as the canyon depths. The world would not be kind to you. It never was, she said. But you were. For the first time, his expression cracked. He stepped close, one hand brushing her cheek. And in that quiet, sacred moment beneath the stars, their lips met, soft, slow, full of every word they hadn't dared to speak. When they parted, neither smiled. Go, he said gently, before staying becomes too hard. She didn't argue. Love in this world was not a fairy tale. It was fire between two worlds, and fire always leaves a mark. They left at dawn, just as the cliffs turned amber with morning light. The Apache did not gather to say farewell. It wasn't their way. Tahu stood at the ridge, arms crossed, watching them ride. Clara didn't look back until they reached the valley floor. When she did, he was gone. The trail back was long and bitter. Her father spoke little, though his grip on her shoulder was softer now. Her mother's silence was louder than words. But Clara was not the same girl who had followed shadows into the night. She carried the canyon in her bones now, the stories in her memory, and the fire on her lips. They returned to the town near the river, a place that felt smaller than before. The people greeted them with awe and suspicion. Rumors of Apache raids and settler deaths had traveled fast. Clara said nothing. Let them think what they would. She no longer belonged to their narrow world. Weeks passed. Her father sold the wagon and began tending a small plot of land. Her mother went to church daily, and Clara wandered. At night, she stood near the river, watching the moon rise, fingers tracing the beads of Tahu's bracelet like it was a pulse. Letters came from distant cousins, offers of marriage, suggestions of a better life back east. Clara smiled politely, then burned them. One evening, her father sat beside her on the porch, staring at the horizon. He saved us, he said quietly. Whatever else he was, I owe him that. She looked at him, surprised. So do I, she said. He nodded once. You'll never be the same. She looked at the stars, remembering the way they burned above Red Rock. I hope not. And though the world around her moved on, Clara kept a part of herself hidden, wrapped in memory and flame, knowing some love stories are not told out loud. They live in the space between silence and longing. And some nights, when the wind shifted just right, she could swear she heard a hawk's cry echoing across the sky. 2 winters passed. Clara's hair had grown longer, her gaze more settled, but the ache never faded. She went about her days with quiet purpose, tending to her father's crops, helping her mother with church duties. But each night ended the same, staring toward the horizon where memory lived. The world around her changed. Rail lines stretched closer. More settlers came. The talk in town grew louder, harsher. Apache sightings, threats, fears. Clara said nothing. She simply waited for something she couldn't name. Then one day, word arrived. A wagon party had been attacked in the east. Survivors claimed they were warned off by a lone Apache before the ambush. The description chilled her. A tall man, quiet, commanding. Clara packed a satchel before dawn the next day. She left no note. Her father watched her mount the old horse with knowing eyes. He didn't stop her. Her mother prayed louder that morning. Clara rode alone for 3 days, following no map, just the shape of memory. She crossed rivers, valleys, and wind-swept trails, retracing the path burned into her soul. The land welcomed her like an old friend, rough, wild, but familiar. On the 4th night, she camped by a stream. The sky stretched black above her, stars blinking like ancient signals. And then, just past the flames, movement, a whisper of shadow. She stood, heart racing. You always walk into danger, a voice said. She turned. Tahu stood there, older, unchanged, as if time had passed only for her. Only when I know what's on the other side, she replied. Neither moved. The fire crackled between them. Why did you come back? He asked. Because nothing else made sense, she whispered. He stepped forward, slow, deliberate. The world hasn't changed. But I have. Tahu studied her face, then lifted his hand. Between his fingers, the bracelet she had left by the stream. I kept it, he said, hoping you'd return. She reached for it, her fingers brushing his. I never left, she said. And as they stood there, two lives spun from opposite worlds. The canyon wrapped around them like an answer. The fire didn't burn them this time. It warmed. It welcomed. It whispered that some stories don't end. They circle back when the time is right. Clara stayed, not as a guest, not as a settler, but as someone reborn between fire and stone. Tahu took her to the high village, his people's heart hidden between carved cliffs and sacred wind. There, words were not used loosely, and time moved with the rhythm of the sun. Some of the elders remembered her. Some didn't approve. A white woman meant danger, memory, change. But others watched how she moved through their world, respectful, steady, silent, and saw something else. Not a threat, but a bridge, she learned slowly. Days were spent gathering herbs, mending clothes, listening more than speaking. Nights brought stories, stars, and laughter that settled deep in her bones. Tahu rarely spoke of love, but Clara knew it lived in his every action. In the way he handed her water first, and how his eyes found hers during quiet moments, in the way his shadow never strayed far. They built a life not of fairy tales, but of real things. Earth, fire, hands calloused by work, hearts softened by struggle. And though the outside world grew louder, railroads, armies, settlers pushing closer, within that canyon, peace endured. One evening, as spring painted the cliffs in wildflowers, Clara stood at the edge of the ridge watching the sky bleed gold. Tahu came beside her. "You never asked what it would cost," he said. She smiled, wind brushing her face. "I already knew," he nodded. Below them, children played near the stream, their laughter rising like smoke. One had Clara's eyes. Another had Tahu's calm. In that moment, everything made sense. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. A story no one believed would last, but one that had never needed permission to exist. In town, they still whispered about her, the settler girl who vanished into Apache land. Some said she was taken. Others said she died, but none knew the truth. That she had chosen. That she had loved. That she had found herself where two worlds met, not in surrender, but in union. And every time the hawk circled overhead, its cry cutting across the sky like a promise, Clara would smile. Because she had followed it once, and it had led her home. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the channel with your friends.